Good morning. So my talk is on property rights, and I'm going to talk about some title issues, and I'm going to try to do the impossible and not bore you all to tears, because a lot of people don't like title. I've come to realize over my 16 years with Elexco, but I'm going to talk about it anyways, because as things get more complicated with these more and diverse types of projects, the property rights get more complicated too. And I'm not going to solve any issues up here, but I do want to just talk a little bit about the concerns, the problems, the possible interactions between some of these development projects and the storage projects that are in place now and look to be increasing over the future. My slideshow is decidedly minimalist. I don't have a lot of bells and whistles, but that's the roadmap there. The right to extract, the right to store, who owns what, who has priority, other surface uses if we have time, and then a conclusion. Now, the slideshow is minimalist, but I want you to pay attention to this next slide. It's a slide of a dog. Studies show that speakers get a 40% better grade from the audience when they have a picture of a dog. So what this demonstrates is that I'm not above pandering to your base instincts to gain your acceptance. So, okay. The right to extract. If you own land, you have the right to extract it and use it whatever way you want. But most owners of land don't have the capital, the knowledge, and the resources to extract subsurface minerals. So what they do is they enter into a lease usually. I mean, there's other ways, there's easements, there's deeds. Most typically there's a lease. And that's what gives the developer the right to go on a property and the right, more importantly, to extract the resource from below the property. And this is just a typical granting clause from a lease. And there's a lot of language. And, for every lease or for every company, for every situation, there's different ways to word it. There's different choices you can make on what words to include. This is a kind of a catch-all type of oil and gas exploration lease. It gives the lessee, the developer, the leased substances. And it's not defined here, it's defined later in the lease, but that's important because are we talking about petroleum, natural gas, or other substances? And you can put whatever you want into a lease. It doesn't mean you're always going to be looking for those substances, but to cover your bases, sometimes developers try to include a wide variety of possible situations. So the lease substances could be oil. It could be as simple as that. Or it could be a long list of hydrocarbons, petroleum, natural gas, other related substances, and or minerals. And it gives the lessee the right to go upon the land, and of course that's got to be defined too, to explore, drill for, win, take, remove, dispose of the leased substances, which are the gas or the oil or whatever you else defined. Also to enter upon and use and occupy the surface of the land, to drill wells, build pipelines. So this is the core document that gives the developer the right to do what they want to do. And these documents, once they're signed, and they can stay in place for decades. We saw evidence of wells that were drilled in the late 1800s. Assuming those were under a lease, that lease perpetuates for as long as those substances are being produced. So this is not just like a 1 or a 2 year deal usually. Usually this is a contract that's going to exist for decades. The right to store is a little bit different because in that previous language, it was the right to take away those substances. That's what that developer was really concerned about. I want to take the oil and gas and I want to sell it to market. Now, some developers are forward thinking and try to include the right to store in the same lease. And the right to store would be the opposite of the right to extract. You're taking substances produced from somewhere else, bringing them to the property, and putting them down, usually the same well, or maybe a reworked well that you had drilled to extract them. So a lot of landowners will say, wait a second, I'm good with your production. I want the royalties from that. But you know what? I don't want this to go beyond that time frame. So often developers would try to include the right to store inside of the oil and gas lease. But a lot of times landowners, especially ones who are in areas that have historic production, are a little bit more savvy, would say, we're not doing that. We're going to strike that out of here. I want these to be two separate leases. These are two separate activities. I want two separate contractual agreements with you. So when you're done with the production, come back to me and we'll talk about storage. And that's some typical language from a separate lease, which would be the storage lease. And so hereby demise lease unto the lessee, its successors, and the assigns for the purpose of injecting, storing, and withdrawing gas, natural and or artificial. And all those last 6-7 words are kind of important because injecting is one part of the process. Storing is kind of the long-term part of the process. But then it's the withdrawal too. You're not just storing it there, especially for natural gas, forever. You want to take it back out and use it later on. So if you had a lease that only allowed injecting and storing, you wouldn't necessarily be able to come back and take that gas out and sell it on the market later on. And then what's especially important here is what types of substances are you allowed to store under this lease? Because again, this lease is the contractual document that gives you the rights as a developer. And here it's gas, and they specify natural and or artificial. So before it used to be more like gas, natural gas, but they're starting to expand the language to try and capture more of the substances that might be used or stored these days. It could be brine, it could be hydrogen we've been talking about, it could be compressed air, it could be sequestered carbon. All have the same. It's the same idea for them all. You want to store something below ground, and this is the lease that gives you the rights to do that. Who has what rights? And so I'm going to ask you to think about in your mind like 100-acre parcel, 100-acre farm parcel. It's one pin. It's 100 acres. It's roughly flat. There's a couple of farm buildings on it, but it's mostly used for corn or hay or some agricultural use on the surface. So who has the rights to that parcel? Well, this is where things can get pretty complex, especially in an area where there's been a lot of historic production and or storage. Because in the simplest case, you've got the owner of this 100-acre farm, and they own from the center of the earth to the heavens above, as the phrase goes. And that means they own the surface, they own the air, and they own everything below it, below the surface. But a lot of folks realized they had this farm, they had an oil and gas lease on it, and they were making money off it. So when they go to sell the farm, they often reserve, or they can reserve, the oil, gas, and minerals beneath. So now you've got two separate owners of this 100-acre tract. You've got the surface owner, and you've got the oil, gas, and mineral owner. So if you were needing to work both the surface and the subsurface, you might need to contact both of those owners. Even more complex it can get. So if the surface owner has a lessee for one use, and then the subsurface owner has a lessee for another use, now you've got 4 interested parties that you might need to contact if you wanted to develop a portion of this land, because you've got 4 people with interest: surface, subsurface, surface lessee, subsurface lessee. So say you reserve the oil and gas and minerals from the surface back in the day, you don't have necessarily the right to store anything there, right? Because you have the right to take the oil, gas, and minerals away and to mine them, excavate them, take them away and sell them. But you don't have the right necessarily to put anything into the pore spaces that were left after that extraction process was finished. So even though you have the oil, you might own the oil and gas rights under this 100 acres, you might not own the pore space. So that's another complicating factor where if you're looking to develop both the surface, the subsurface, you might have now an additional person involved, somebody that owns the storage rights. And I've seen different scenarios where this can go, these permutations can become almost endless. You've got, like I said, surface owners, subsurface owners, storage owners, subsurface storage owner, you've got lessees, you've got somebody that owns the coal, you've got somebody that has a lease on the coal. And all of a sudden you can be dealing on 100-acre parcel, but you could have like 5 or 6 different parties that have rights there. And to navigate those rights starts to become a little complicated. You have to identify them all, look at their deeds and their leases, know exactly what rights they have before you can start analyzing whether there are rights left over that you might need, and who do you go to get all of those rights. And so then you think about this 100-acre farm. It's complicated for that, but a lot of these storage projects encompass thousands of acres, if not more. So now, not every farm is going to be as complicated. Some are going to be much less complicated, but some are even going to be more complicated. Somebody, I think yesterday, referenced the possibility of heirs owning the oil and gas and minerals. And the more generations you go down, sometimes the more of those heirs you get multiplied as they have kids and their kids have kids and their kids have kids. So I've been involved in a situation. There was a 100-acre farm, 136 owners of the oil, gas, and minerals, right? That's just the oil, gas, and minerals. Then there's the surface owner and the storage owner. So then you've got lessees for each one of those. And all of a sudden, you're dealing with 140 people for one parcel. Spread that out across the whole storage field, and the situation starts to get very complicated. And that's really my main point, is that there are a lot of uses underground. And there's a lot of owners that have separated their rights. And there's also not only subsurface oil and gas mineral owners, but like somebody could have reserved the minerals just to a certain formation or a certain depth. So you could have 2 different subsurface owners as well as the surface. And I'm just trying to convey to you the complex situations that you can run into, especially if there's been development, early development, historic development on those properties. Who has priority out of all of those folks? Well, if you are the owner of the property and there's no leases and no severances, you have the priority. Then as soon as you start leasing rights to a developer, you give up that priority for those leased activities, and that developer has the priority. And typically they register their document, and it's noticed to the entire world that they have these rights of this property. So the next developer who comes in is subject to those previous rights. So you can't use the property however you want, because somebody else, the prior lessee, would have rights prior to you. And then prior to that is the owner. So it depends, or it's important to know what rights are already in the property before you start planning how to use the property for yourself. And I'm not going to get into surface uses. There's a lot of them out there. What I'm going to conclude with is that things get complicated. You need to consider not only what is there too, like what is there, what has been built there, what wells are there, or what other things have been built on the surface, but who has the rights to build things in the future too. So you don't want to drill a well only to find out that somebody else had the right to drill a well there first, and I guess kick you off, make you take your well out, plug your well so that they can drill a well that they wanted to. I think that's about it. I just wanted to convey to you that there's the title situation here is probably going to get more complicated the more and different types of these projects that keep coming online in the future. And that's my talk. Thank you.